At 91 years old, Robert discovered something that made him question almost everything he thought mattered. The strange part wasn't what he found, it was where he found it. The drawer sat quietly in the corner of his bedroom. It had been there for years. So long, in fact, that Robert barely noticed it anymore. Dust gathered on top. Old memories slept inside, and like many things we stopped noticing, it slowly became part of the background of his life. Have you ever looked at something you've seen 1,000 times and suddenly noticed it differently? An old photograph, a familiar chair, a birthday card tucked away in a drawer, something ordinary that somehow carried an entire chapter of your life inside it. That's exactly what happened to Robert. That morning, Robert wasn't searching for memories. He was looking for a screwdriver. But life has a strange way of showing us what we need instead of what we're looking for. As he pulled the drawer open, something immediately caught his attention. It wasn't money. It wasn't anything valuable. In fact, most people would have thrown it away without a second thought. It was a child's drawing. Crumpled, faded, nearly forgotten. Robert smiled. He already knew who had drawn it. His daughter, back when she was small enough to sit on his shoulders, back when the biggest problem in her world was choosing a crayon color. For a moment, Robert stood perfectly still, not because of the drawing. The drawing wasn't important. The date was. The date sat quietly at the bottom of the page. Small, easy to miss, yet Robert couldn't stop looking at it, because that little date reminded him of something most people never notice while it's happening. Life doesn't disappear all at once. It disappears one ordinary day at a time. His daughter had been 7 years old. She was now 61. Robert tried doing the math twice, then a third time, not because he couldn't count, but because his heart couldn't quite believe it. Where had all those years gone? The birthdays, the school plays, the family dinners, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons nobody thinks they'll miss, yet somehow miss the most. Nobody tells you that one day the noise becomes a memory. One day the toys disappear, the backpacks disappear, the little footsteps disappear, and the house grows quiet in ways you never expected. Robert looked down at the drawing again, a simple piece of paper, yet somehow it felt heavier than anything he had held in years. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking at a drawing. He was looking at time itself. And time had moved much faster than he realized. As Robert carefully placed the drawing on the bed, he noticed something underneath it, an envelope, yellowed with age, unopened. At first he didn't recognize it. Then he saw the handwriting, and in that moment, everything changed, because the envelope had been written by someone who had been gone for many years. Robert carefully placed the envelope beside him. For a moment he thought about opening it. But something else in the drawer caught his attention, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. The edges were worn. The ink had begun to fade. Robert unfolded it slowly. Then he smiled. It was his promotion letter. The letter that had once meant everything to him. The letter he had proudly shown his wife. The letter he had celebrated with friends. The letter he believed would change his life. And in many ways, it did. As Robert looked at the paper, he could still remember that day. He remembered walking into the house with excitement. He remembered the smile on his wife's face. He remembered feeling proud. For years he believed that promotion was one of the most important moments of his life. But standing there at 91 years old, something unexpected occurred to him. Almost nobody remembered it. Not his neighbors, not his grandchildren, not even his daughter. The promotion that once felt so important had slowly faded into history. Then another thought entered his mind. The people he loved never talked about his job title. They talked about family vacations, birthday parties, funny stories, long conversations around the dinner table. And suddenly Robert understood something he had never fully understood before. Nobody remembers your title. They remember how you made them feel. He sat quietly for a moment, thinking, reflecting, and wondering how many years he had spent chasing things that eventually disappeared. Then another memory surfaced. A school play. His daughter had been chosen for a small role, nothing major, just a few lines. But she had practiced for weeks. Robert remembered promising he would be there. He intended to be there. He wanted to be there. But that same week, something important happened at work. A meeting, a deadline, a responsibility that couldn't wait. At least that's what he told himself at the time. His wife attended the play. Robert stayed at the office. Years later, he could barely remember the meeting, but he never forgot missing the play. That was the strange thing about life. The moments we sacrifice often disappear, but the moments we miss can stay with us forever. Success often asks for payment. The bill arrives years later. Robert wasn't angry with himself. He wasn't filled with regret. He simply saw things differently now. Age has a way of changing what matters. The older he became, the more he realized that life's greatest treasures rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary moments: a Tuesday afternoon, a family dinner, a walk around the neighborhood, a child asking you to sit beside them. At the time, those moments seem small, almost forgettable, yet years later, they become priceless. Robert closed his eyes, and suddenly he was no longer standing in his bedroom. He was back in his old house. His daughter sat at the kitchen table coloring pictures. His wife moved around the kitchen preparing dinner. The family dog slept peacefully in the corner. Nothing extraordinary was happening. No celebration, no major achievement, no life-changing event. Just an ordinary day. The kind of day most people barely notice while they're living it. Yet somehow it was those ordinary days he missed the most. Nobody knows which ordinary day will become a precious memory. When Robert opened his eyes again, another object caught his attention. A travel brochure, bright colors, beautiful photographs, a dream vacation. He immediately remembered it. For years, he and his wife talked about taking that trip. Every year they made the same promise. Next year, after things settle down, after retirement, after life becomes less busy, but life never became less busy. Something always came first: work, responsibilities, obligations, unexpected problems. The trip remained a plan. Then it became a dream. Then it became a memory of a dream. And eventually, it became a brochure sitting forgotten inside a drawer. Robert slowly ran his fingers across the cover. Some people spend their whole lives preparing to live. The words felt painfully true, not because of the trip, but because of what the trip represented. The tendency to believe there will always be more time, more years, more opportunities, more tomorrows. At 91, Robert understood something many people learn too late. Tomorrow is a gift, not a guarantee. He carefully placed the brochure back into the drawer. Then his eyes returned to the envelope. The room suddenly felt different. The promotion letter no longer mattered. The travel brochure no longer mattered. Because Robert now knew exactly who had written the letter, and for the first time since finding it, he felt nervous. The handwriting belonged to someone he had loved deeply, someone he had lost many years ago. Robert picked up the envelope carefully. For a long moment, he simply held it in his hands. The paper felt fragile, almost delicate, as though time itself had become something he could touch. His eyes remained fixed on the handwriting. He knew that handwriting. He had seen it on birthday cards, grocery lists, Christmas gifts, little notes left on the kitchen counter, notes that once seemed ordinary, notes he would give anything to read again. Slowly, Robert opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. He unfolded it and began to read. The first sentence made him smile. Robert, if you're reading this, then you finally opened one of the things I told you not to keep forever." He laughed softly. Even after all these years, it sounded exactly like her. Not dramatic, not poetic, just her. Warm, honest, familiar. For a moment, the bedroom disappeared, and Robert was back in the kitchen, watching her pour coffee on a quiet Sunday morning, listening to her remind him about something he had forgotten, smiling at a joke she had heard 100 times before. The strange thing about losing someone is this: you don't miss the big moments every day. You miss the ordinary ones, the sound of their footsteps, the way they said your name, the small conversations you thought would always be there. Robert continued reading. The letter wasn't about achievements. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about success. Instead, she wrote about things Robert had completely forgotten. The way he always checked that every door was locked before bed. The way he pretended not to like holidays but secretly enjoyed every one of them. The way he always gave the larger piece of cake to someone else. Tiny things, simple things. Yet somehow they felt more important than any accomplishment he had ever achieved. As Robert read those words, another realization slowly settled into his heart. The people who love us remember things about us that we never notice ourselves. They remember our kindness, our habits, our laughter, our patience, the small moments that quietly reveal who we really are. Most of us spend our lives measuring ourselves by accomplishments, but the people who love us often measure us differently. They remember how we made them feel. A tear formed in Robert's eye, not because the letter was sad, but because it was true. As he continued reading, the tone of the letter changed. She wrote about time, about how quickly it passes, about how easy it is to believe there will always be more of it, more summers, more conversations, more opportunities to say the things we mean to say. Then Robert reached a sentence that stopped him completely. "Please don't spend your remaining years counting what you've lost." He read the sentence again, then a third time. "Please don't spend your remaining years counting what you've lost." The room grew quiet. How many years had he spent doing exactly that? Thinking about what was gone, thinking about who was gone, thinking about opportunities that never returned. But the letter wasn't finished. Beneath that sentence, she had written something else. "Spend them appreciating what still remains." Robert lowered the paper. For several seconds, he simply stared out the window. The trees moved gently in the afternoon breeze. The sunlight touched the floor. Life was still happening. The world was still moving. And for the first time that day, Robert wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what still remained: his daughter, his grandchildren, his memories, his stories, his friendships, his time. Maybe not unlimited time, but time nonetheless. Then he looked back down at the letter and smiled, because even after all these years, she was still teaching him something. And perhaps that was the lesson he needed most. The purpose of growing older is not to carry the weight of every regret. It is to finally understand what truly matters. Robert folded the letter carefully and placed it beside him. His heart felt lighter than it had that morning, but the drawer was not finished with him yet. Because underneath the letter sat another forgotten reminder from a life he thought he already understood. Robert sat quietly for a few moments after ending the call. The room no longer felt as empty as it had that morning. The photograph rested beside the letter. 2 reminders from a life he had lived. 2 reminders from a life he had almost forgotten to appreciate. As he looked into the drawer one final time, he noticed something tucked into the very back corner. A small notebook. Simple, worn, barely noticeable. The kind of thing most people would overlook. Robert picked it up and opened the cover. Inside were pages filled with his own handwriting. Some entries were decades old, others were newer. As he turned the pages, he began to smile. There were ideas, dreams, plans, things he had once wanted to do, places he wanted to visit, books he wanted to read, skills he wanted to learn, people he wanted to spend more time with. Some pages were unfinished, some plans were never started, some dreams had simply been postponed. And suddenly, Robert understood something. The notebook wasn't showing him failure, it was showing him possibility. For years, he had looked backward at mistakes, backward at opportunities that had passed, backward at people he missed. But this notebook pointed in a different direction, forward. At 91 years old, Robert found himself asking a question he hadn't asked in a very long time. What do I still want to do? Not what did I do? Not what should I have done? What do I still want to do? The question felt surprisingly exciting. Because deep down, Robert realized something important. As long as there is curiosity, there is life. As long as there is purpose, there is life. As long as there is something worth looking forward to, there is life. For decades, Robert had defined himself by roles: worker, provider, husband, father. Those roles mattered. They always would. But they were not the entire story. A person is more than the roles they once played. A person is also the dreams they still carry, the lessons they still share, the lives they still touch. Growing older does not mean your story is ending. It means your story has become valuable. Robert slowly turned another page. One entry caught his attention. It had been written many years earlier. Just a short sentence. Nothing dramatic. Nothing profound. Yet it stopped him completely. It read, "Don't wait too long to enjoy your life." Robert laughed softly, then shook his head. Because that younger version of himself had been wiser than he realized. How many people spend years waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect conditions, the perfect opportunity, the perfect time? Yet life rarely unfolds according to perfect plans. Life happens now, in ordinary moments, ordinary conversations, ordinary afternoons, the same kind of moments Robert had been remembering all day. For the first time, he saw a pattern: the drawing, the promotion letter, the travel brochure, the letter from his wife, the photograph, the notebook. They were all teaching the same lesson. Life's greatest treasures are rarely the things we expect. They are the people we love, the memories we create, the connections we maintain, the purpose we continue to pursue. Robert gently closed the notebook. Then he looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The furniture was the same. The walls were the same. The view outside the window was the same. Yet everything felt different, because Robert felt different. Earlier that morning, he had opened the drawer searching for a screwdriver. Instead, he found perspective. He thought he was opening a drawer. What he was really opening was a lifetime of lessons, lessons that had been waiting patiently for him to notice them. As he stood up, Robert carefully placed every item back where he had found it: the drawing, the promotion letter, the brochure, the photograph, the notebook, and finally, the letter. But this time, he placed them back with gratitude instead of regret. Then he closed the drawer. Not because the story was over, but because he finally understood it. Time takes many things from us, but it also teaches us what matters. And perhaps that is one of life's greatest gifts: the wisdom to recognize what truly deserves our attention. Before walking away, Robert paused and smiled, because for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't thinking about the years behind him. He was thinking about the years ahead. Maybe there would be fewer of them, but they still belonged to him, and that made them precious. The most valuable years of your life may not be behind you. They may be the years when you finally understand what matters. You cannot change the years behind you, but you can still change the meaning of the years ahead. And if Robert's story reminded you of someone you love, someone you miss, or someone you should call, tell us about them below. because stories like these become even more meaningful when they are shared. And perhaps together we can remind each other of something important, no matter your age, no matter your past, no matter how many years have gone by. Your story is not finished yet.